All right, let's get into it. Indian politics, always serving up something interesting, right? And we're zooming in on a specific moment, June 2025.
Yeah, it was a fascinating time. India was very focused externally, lots happening on the global stage, but internally, particularly within the Indian National Congress, there was this really revealing drama playing out.
Exactly. We were looking through some material that really pulls back the curtain on the Congress Party. And there's this analogy that keeps coming up, maybe a bit harsh, but vivid, the crabs in a basket.
It describes that internal dynamic, doesn't it? Where instead of, helping each other climb out, there's this tendency to pull back anyone who starts getting ahead.
And this whole crab basket thing really snapped into focus recently because of a situation involving a very prominent MP and the trigger, a big government diplomatic initiative called Operation Sindoor.
Right, Operation Sindoor. So the government launched this as a strategic response, basically, to counter cross-border terrorism.
A major diplomatic component was key here.
Absolutely. It was like a diplomatic roadshow. They put together 7 multi-party delegations, sent them off to major world capitals, Paris, D.C., Beijing, the works.
The idea being a united front.
Exactly. India speaking with one voice, MPs, former diplomats, all standing together against terror.
A smart move, politically and diplomatically, show national unity. And you had people from the ruling party, regional players. Pretty much everyone, it seemed.
Everyone except one very noticeable absence.
Shashi Tharoor, the Congress MP from Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala.
Yeah. And when you look at his profile, his exclusion from these delegations just seems, baffling, frankly.
Tell us about him. The sources paint quite a picture.
They do. He's 69, but looks much younger, right? Former UN Undersecretary General. I mean, that's a huge deal on the world stage.
Plus, prolific author, huge online following.
Over 20 books. And he's known everywhere for being incredibly articulate, deep expertise, especially foreign policy. He just has that knack for charming audiences globally.
So, given all that, and him being the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs.
You'd think he'd be pick number 1, right, for a foreign policy delegation?
Absolutely. Which is why leaving him off felt deliberate, not just an accident. And the sources we looked at suggest the party leadership, figures often referred to as Raga and Sonia, didn't just leave him out.
No, they apparently pushed back quite strongly when questioned, verbally.
And the official reason they gave.
Oh, this was curious. They basically suggested that the ruling party lacked articulate spokespeople and needed to, quote, borrow Tharoor's eloquence to defend Operation Sindoor.
Wait, so the justification for excluding him from a national effort was that he was too good and the other side needed him?
Pretty much. Instead of explaining why their top foreign policy voice wasn't representing the nation, they flipped it into this strange compliment/excuse about loaning him out.
Which, when you look at the reality inside Congress at the time, does that explanation hold water?
Not really, according to the analysis. I mean, let's be honest, the Congress Party itself wasn't exactly overflowing with globally renowned orators at that point.
There were capable people, sure, but
maybe not consistently landing their message with that same kind of impact. Spokespersons sometimes seemed hesitant or struggled to cut through.
So sidelining arguably your most globally recognized voice on his specific area of expertise, it looks like a massive PR own goal, doesn't it?
Completely. Like that analogy used in the source material of the student group project where you bench the class topper.
But still expect an A+.
Right.
It just doesn't track logically. Unless there's another logic at play.
Which brings us back to that crab basket idea. This Operation Sindoor snub seems like a perfect example of it in action.
It really does. And the sources stress this isn't just a metaphor. It's described as a pretty harsh, long-standing reality within the party's history.
So explain that tradition again. What does it mean in practice? It means if someone starts rising too high, too fast, maybe because of talent, maybe popularity, charisma, whatever, others within the party apparatus tend to find ways to pull them back down.
Keep them in their place.
Essentially. Prevent anyone from becoming too independent, too powerful, potentially overshadowing the established hierarchy.
And Tharoor, with his profile, he seems like a prime target for that dynamic.
Almost perfectly designed for it, you could say. His UN fame, his consistent wins in Kerala, holding Thiruvananthapuram since 2009, even in bad election years for Congress.
Plus the books, the speeches, the global network.
He stands out. He's a towering figure, especially when the party, as the analysis suggests, is finding it hard to groom new leaders with that kind of national or international stature.
So his strengths become a liability.
Yeah.
internally.
That seems to be the perception in some quarters. The view attributed to the high command, Sonia, Rahul being key influences, is apparently that they don't appreciate someone else hogging the limelight or controlling the narrative.
So the delegation snub wasn't an accident. It was a message.
That's how it's framed. A deliberate move to reinforce who's really in charge, regardless of who might be best qualified for a specific task, even a national one.
There was a quote attributed to a senior leader, wasn't there? Pretty blunt.
Yeah, something along the lines of Tharoor being seen as too big for his boots. And the core idea that despite any individual brilliance, the party is still fundamentally the Gandhi show.
That really lays bare the priorities, doesn't it? Loyalty and lineage potentially trumping merit.
It suggests a deep-rooted structure where rising purely on your own capabilities is, let's say, complicated.
But this whole episode, it's bigger than just one person being snubbed, right? It points towards a deeper issue for the Congress Party.
Oh, absolutely. The analysis links this directly to a broader identity crisis the party's been facing for years, certainly intensifying since the 2014 general election defeat and the struggles afterwards.
This giant of Indian politics, the party of Nehru, Indira, Rajiv, now fighting for relevance.
That's the picture painted. The political ground has shifted massively. The current ruling party is dominant, and Congress is seen as struggling to find its footing, its core message, its path back.
The analogy used was like a fading family business.
Yeah, relying too heavily on the famous brand name, the legacy of the founders, while competitors are busy innovating and capturing the market, clinging to the past, perhaps, instead of forging a new future.
And internal culture plays a big part in that struggle.
Seems so. The sources point to this tendency to favor loyalists, sometimes over proven talent, and how dissent, even constructive criticism, can be treated quite harshly.
Like the G23 leaders back in 2020.
Exactly. Senior figures who wrote that letter asking for reforms, for introspection, what happened, mostly sidelined. Some left the party altogether, it sends a message.
Which puts someone like Tharoor in a really tough spot.
Definitely. He stuck around, remained loyal despite these incidents. It highlights that internal conflict. How do you contribute your best when your very success seems to make some people nervous?
Okay, let's circle back to Operation Sindoor specifically. It really crystallizes the problem. Tharoor's own take on it was interesting.
Yeah, he wrote something around June 12th, 2025. His point was simple. Foreign policy should be about India, about national interests, not party politics.
Makes sense. When the country needs to project unity abroad.
Internal squabbles should ideally take a back seat, which is why leaving him out the chair of the External Affairs Committee, the guy with decades of global experience.
Someone who's probably attended more global summits than most people have had hot dinners.
Right. Leaving him out just felt jarring. It wasn't just a personal slight to him. The analysis frames it as a kind of national embarrassment from the party side, a wasted opportunity.
That analogy about benching Virat Kohli for the final, it really hits home.
It does. You just don't sideline your star player for the biggest game without a very compelling, probably hidden reason.
So that official line, he wasn't recommended, it falls apart under scrutiny.
Pretty quickly. Recommended by whom? Why wouldn't you recommend your most qualified person for that specific role? It begs the question.
And the insider perspective offers a different, maybe more plausible explanation.
Yes. The view presented is that his sheer prominence is seen as a threat to the established family dominance.
Specifically, to Rahul Gandhi's position.
That's the implication. Even though he's faced electoral setbacks and is now, in his mid-50s, he's still seen as the intended leader. And someone like Tharoor, with his own charisma and following, could potentially overshadow him or offer an alternative power center.
So it's about preventing rivals from emerging.
And protecting the perceived succession. Plus, you have the continuing influence of Sonia Gandhi.
The matriarch figure.
Exactly. Even with reported health issues, her influence behind the scenes is described as immense. And the priority remains family. Loyalty. That dynamic makes it even harder for someone seen as an outsider, however talented, to break through.
So let's map out this cast of characters as the sources frame them.
Okay, first you have the favorite.
Rahul Gandhi, often called the eternal prince, right? Mid-50s now. Still the face of the party, despite the electoral record, largely because of the name.
Supporters see vision, critics see, well, maybe a part-time politician. The sources mention things like trekking versus campaigning.
And his recent critiques of Tharoor fit into this narrative of asserting control.
That's the interpretation offered.
And
there's that memorable Wi-Fi signal analogy for his leadership. Strong sometimes, but then just drops out.
Okay. Then The eloquent.
Shashi Tharoor. The big asset the party seems unsure how to handle. His crime, perhaps, is just being too good.
Too good at debating, connecting, articulating.
Yeah, and apparently some colleagues see that as a threat, makes him feel inadequate, rather than seeing him as someone who lifts the whole team.
And finally, the martyr.
Sonia Gandhi, the matriarch, decades of influence, still powerful behind the scenes, making key calls, prioritizing family continuity.
Supporters emphasize her sacrifice for the party. Detractors might point to presiding over a period of decline, clinging to control.
So, putting it all together, the prediction based on past form.
It leans towards the favorite and the martyr consolidating power, and the eloquent getting sidelined. Again.
Seems to be the assessment based on the party's historical patterns.
Okay, so this might all feel like political maneuvering, inside baseball. Why should someone listening, maybe that farmer in Punjab, the techie in Bengaluru, the student in Kolkata, why should they care about these internal Congress dynamics?
That's the crucial question, because it's not just about one party's internal drama, it affects the whole system. A healthy democracy needs a strong, effective opposition.
To provide checks and balances, offer alternatives, hold the government accountable.
Exactly. And the analysis we've reviewed argues pretty strongly that Congress, in its current state, is struggling to be that robust opposition. The jellyfish versus spine analogy really captures that sense of lacking firmness.
And these internal problems, not promoting talent like Tharoor, or maybe others like Jairam Ramesh or Sachin Pilot who were mentioned, that directly impacts their ability to be a credible alternative.
That's the link being made. If you can't get your own house in order, if you seem to penalize success, how do you convince the country you're ready to lead?
And the risk if the opposition remains weak.
Democracy potentially weakens, fewer checks on power, less debate, maybe policies don't get scrutinized as thoroughly. It impacts everyone, eventually.
Serious stuff, though the analysis did add that little footnote.
Yes. Putting aside the serious implications for a moment, the sheer political theater of it all is, well, undeniably entertaining.
Like a high-stakes reality show you can't look away from.
Something like that. Baffling at times, but definitely compelling drama.
So, looking ahead, what are the potential paths for Congress? Does the analysis offer any, unsolicited advice?
It implicitly does, by highlighting the problems. The key recommendations seem to be: first, dial back the favoritism.
Promote based on merit, ability, connection with voters, not just loyalty or name.
Exactly. Let capable people actually lead. Second, they need to update the message. It can't just be about criticizing the ruling party.
They need a positive vision. What do they stand for on jobs, education, climate?
Precisely. Relying solely on the family name as the savior isn't seen as a winning long-term strategy anymore. And third, handle internal dissent better.
Don't treat disagreement as treason.
Right. See it as healthy debate. Engage with different views. Don't just marginalize people who raise uncomfortable questions.
But is there much optimism that these changes will actually happen?
The analysis sounds pretty skeptical, unfortunately. That analogy about being stuck in the past, like still using an old Nokia in the smartphone era, it suggests a deep resistance to fundamental change.
Which brings us right back to Tharoor. What's next for him? He seems to be at a real crossroads.
Absolutely. A significant point in his career. He could stay loyal, of course, hope things change internally. He clearly has strong backing in his own constituency. That 2024 win was huge for him personally.
Demonstrates his own standing, separate from the party's national wave or lack thereof.
Definitely. But the analysis floats other options, too. Joining another party. The ruling party is mentioned, but the ideological fit seems tough.
His liberal views versus their platform.
Yeah, regional parties are another theoretical option, but he's always been seen more as a national, even international figure.
And then there's the idea of starting something new.
Like an Arvind Kejriwal move. Build his own platform. It's a possibility mentioned, maybe aligning with his independent streak.
But for now, his public stance is focused elsewhere.
Seems so. His recent posts, according to the material, are all about serving his constituents in Thiruvananthapuram, rising above the political noise.
Classic Tharoor. Diplomatic, keeping options open.
You could certainly read it that way, intentionally vague, perhaps, while focusing on his duties.
Okay, so let's try and summarize this deep dive. The internal workings of Congress, highlighted by this Operation Sindoor incident, show a party facing serious, perhaps self-inflicted challenges.
Yeah, sidelining talent like Tharoor sends a really negative signal, both inside the party and to the wider public.
And while the prediction is that the established power is the family, the loyalists might win this round.
Consolidate their control, push aside the perceived challenge.
The analysis is clear. Don't write off figures like Tharoor just yet.
No, it's framed like an ongoing story, a complex novel. There could be more twists, more chapters to come.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over, building on what we've discussed. What does this whole situation tell us about the nature of political parties that become so heavily dependent on one family or personality?
And maybe even more critically for India, what's the real cost to democracy when a major opposition force seems unable or unwilling to fully harness the talent within its own ranks? Something to think about.